In the year 1987, American toy manufacturer LJN Toys Limited moved into the rejuvenated and thriving world of the home video game industry as a publishing company, with the ambitious and lofty goal of becoming the leading publisher of licensed video games based on trending movies and television shows of the era. To accomplish this goal, LGN would begin publishing licensed games developed by notable companies, such as Japanese game developer Atlus and British game developer Rare. The vast majority of these games were developed exclusively for home and handheld consoles, released by Japanese developer Nintendo, such as the Nintendo Entertainment System and the Nintendo Game Boy. These licensed titles would explore a wide range of genres and age brackets, from the fun-for-all-ages sci-fi comedy adventures of the 1989 film Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, to the mature horror thriller of the 1975 film Jaws. No, sorry, the 1987 film Jaws the Revenge, for some reason. However, despite a wide variety of popular 80s franchises at LJN's disposal, the games were lambasted for their nonsensical design and lack of relevance to their source material. LJN would continue to publish games into the 1990s, eventually closing their original toys division in order to focus on this venture. Alas, the company would eventually dissolve in 1994, leaving their legacy of mediocre licensed games to fall into obscurity. In recent years, LJN Toys Limited has re-entered the consciousness of the wider video game community due to its prevalence in online content focused on purportedly bad retro video games, particularly the long-running online persona, the angry video game nerd, portrayed by content creator James Rolfe, who has displayed and criticised the company's wide video game library for a number of years.
Is this scary enough? Okay, now it just got fucking scary!
As a result, one particular title would appear as one of the more iconic and bizarre releases in LJN's video game publishing history, and would stand out in the midst of their newfound public attention. A side-scrolling action-adventure game developed by previously mentioned Atlus, based on the long-running slasher horror franchise titled Friday the 13th. The game, released in 1989, is often cited by online publishers as one of the worst, most difficult video games ever created, and is especially noted for the unusual sprite design for Jason Voorhees, the ever-present antagonist of the film franchise. Voorhees, famously depicted as a walking corpse, donning an ice hockey goalie mask and brandishing a machete, appeared in a wholly non-threatening and excruciatingly 80s two-tone purple and cyan colour scheme. These elements would elevate the Friday the 13th NES game amongst LJN's library. In the end, LJN would disappear, while Friday the 13th would continue releasing films throughout the 80s, 90s and noughties, with its final film, a remake of the franchise's 1980 debut, releasing in 2009. Friday the 13th continues to be lauded as one of the most iconic franchises in the slasher horror genre, with Jason Voorhees reigning as arguably the most famous slasher villain of all time. Friday the 13th would expand its brand into novels and comic books, with no attempt to break into the world of video games again, until one fateful day in early 2015, where an upcoming video game publisher would have a meeting with the franchise's most prevalent producer, and the beginning of an intriguing, highly anticipated, and, unbeknownst to everyone involved, doomed to fail video game project. This is the story of Friday the 13th the game, its fervent community, the complicated history of its developers, the blending of film and video game talents, the entanglement of the slasher horror and video game communities, and the unfortunate circumstances that resulted in the slow and painful shutdown of the game after only a few short years of existence. In the year 2010, two newcomers to the video game industry, named Wes Keltner and Ronnie Hobbs, would come together to establish a brand new video game publishing company based in their home state of Kentucky in the United States, named Gun Media. The duo, who began working as video game journalists for a local Kentucky website in the year 2000, would rapidly become unsatisfied in their roles. They would purportedly attempt to sneak into the largest video game trade event in the United States, the Electronic Entertainment Expo, otherwise known as E3, in order to write blogs for the website and mingle with established video game developers. Keltner and Hobbs would eventually split off from the website in order to develop their own video game concepts and pursue other ventures in the industry together. They would establish an advertising agency dedicated to assisting large brands in product placement through video games, and later a consulting firm working on video game titles for notable game and console developers behind the scenes, such as Sony and Microsoft. After finally establishing Gun Media, the duo focused their efforts on developing original concepts for games and hiring developers to create them from the ground up, as well as developers who had concepts for video games of their own. This would lead to the release of their first title, a turn-based strategy game made for mobile phones titled Breach and Clear, on July 17th, 2013. First on iOS, the operating system utilised by the Apple iPhone. The game was developed by independent publisher Mighty Rabbit Studios, and it would later be ported to home computers via Microsoft Windows, Apple Mac OS, and Linux. A physical version would even be ported to the handheld console developed by Sony, the PlayStation Vita. Interesting bonus tidbit: the physical edition of Breach and Clear, which was released via video game distributor Limited Run Games, is currently the rarest physical title for the PlayStation Vita in North America. Despite the wide distribution of the title, as well as a sequel, Breach and Clear Deadline, released on May 21st, 2015, the game received a fairly lukewarm reception from critics, and the franchise would fail in establishing Gun Media as a notable video game publisher. This initial publishing would pale in comparison to the company's first game to be published on a console, the fighting game slash party game slash rock paper scissors game titled Speakeasy, released on November 25th, 2014. Speakeasy would be developed by studio Supersoul and was released exclusively for the Sony PlayStation 4. The game, set in the 1920s, with cel-shaded characters and settings, would see players facing off one-on-one in the style of a traditional fighting game, substituting complex button inputs for free moves, attack, defend, or fake out, meaning players would have to predict each other's movements in order to win. The game was lambasted by critics, with one review citing it as possibly the worst game available on the platform. This critique would actually prompt a response from an executive producer in Gun Media, a man named Ben Strauss, offering his perspective of the game and even free codes for readers to download Speakeasy and judge for themselves. Despite this, the game would remain unpopular with reviewers and players alike, and the game would later become unavailable for download on PlayStation Network, the console's online service. With two games in Gun Media's publishing portfolio, both of them reportedly being mediocre at best and terrible at worst, the company seemed doomed to exist as a publisher that would fall by the wayside. But then, seeing a gap in the market and a gameplay concept barely tapped into by the industry, Wes Keltner and Ronnie Hobbs, along with their team, would begin to set the groundwork for what would become the title that would put Gun Media on the map of the gaming world. By the end of 2013, Keltner and Hobbs would begin to seriously consider developing the concept of a video game based on the styles and aesthetics of previously mentioned slasher horror films from the 1970s to 1980s, a premise that the duo had been toying with alongside various developers since at least 1998.
Well, they cleaned all this up now. Big difference. You should have seen the blood. A whole The whole place was, well, it's too horrible to describe. Dreadful. And I'll tell you...
Slasher, a prevalent subgenre in the world of horror, followed the simple premise of a killer wielding a typically bladed weapon whilst murdering a number of people one by one, typically in graphic and creative ways. The subgenre is typically cited by movie analysts as finding its roots within the 1960 film Psycho, produced and directed by filmmaker Alfred Hitchcock, with the film's antagonist, Norman Bates, murdering two individuals with a kitchen knife. The genre further developed with the 1974 film Black Christmas, produced and directed by filmmaker Bob Clark, which is notable for featuring an unseen killer amassing a large body count. Another less well-known film that would release months before Psycho, titled Peeping Tom, directed by filmmaker Michael Powell, is also cited as an instigator for the subgenre, albeit less notable than its contemporary, due to its then taboo scenes of violence and lurid sexual content, something that would also become a staple for slasher. The subgenre would truly emerge with the 1974 film The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, created by producer, director and co-composer Tobe Hooper, which featured a cannibalistic family of psychopaths terrorising a group of young travellers in the remote part of Texas. Most notably, the cross-dressing, chainsaw-toting face of the franchise known as Leatherface, who could be considered the first icon of the slasher genre. The emerging formula is cited by fans and critics as being fully realised with the 1978 film Halloween, created by director and composer John Carpenter, which featured the most refined rendition of the archetypical slasher villain thus far. The killer, named Michael Myers, or simply The Shape, as he is credited in the original film, is depicted as a silent, expressionless embodiment of evil that hunts and murders teenagers one by one in order to reach his final target, a high school student named Laurie Strode. Slasher would further grow and become galvanised throughout the 1980s. The previously mentioned Halloween and The Texas Chainsaw Massacre would explode into franchises, alongside the new slasher icons such as Freddy Krueger, the killer that hunts his prey in their dreams, as seen in the 1984 film A Nightmare on Elm Street, created by writer and director Wes Craven. Chucky, the possessed killer doll, as seen in the 1988 film Child's Play, created by co-writer and director Tom Holland. Not that Tom Holland, this Tom Holland, and the previously mentioned 1980 film Friday the 13th. This rapid establishment of franchised supernatural killers that all followed a specified formula would inevitably result in predictable patterns in characters, storylines and events that would become clichés in the eyes of horror fans and film analysts. Exploitative sex and drug use, the last survivor of the killer's rampage, typically a woman, standing against the killer as the final girl of the film, the killer stalking their victims and picking them off one by one. The mythological status of the killer that projects them as the face of the series rather than the victims.
Have you listened to the old timers in town? They'll tell you he's still out there. Some sort of demented creature.
The victims themselves unable to escape because their car won't start. A victim stating the words, "I'll be right back."
Alright, be right back. Okay.
Before leaving a room, only to be murdered. All of these are but a small sampling of the historic tropes that appear throughout the genre, and would be seen time and time again throughout slasher films across the board. Perhaps no other slasher title would exploit these tropes better than Friday the 13th, which would effectively follow the same formula and use of tropes throughout its lifespan. The franchise would begin releasing films on an annual to biannual basis from 1980 to 1989, and would rapidly transcend the confines of reality altogether, moving from a string of murders in a campground to resurrecting the dead, to women with telekinetic abilities, to adventures in Manhattan, New York, to demonic possession. The formulaic, exploitative and enjoyable nature of the franchise is succinctly summarised by film critic and horror host Joe Bob Briggs, who states,
"These Friday the 13th guys, they've made the same movie 9 times. That takes talent."
The franchise's consistent release cycle, coupled with the fact that each film followed the same formula and blend of sex and violence, would result in each installment being panned by film critics. The films themselves, much like their contemporaries in the 1980s, would also fall victim to severe censorship at the hands of the Motion Picture Association of America, or MPAA, who were responsible for distributing age ratings for American productions. As a result, many films within the Friday the 13th franchise would heavily edit and cut scenes deemed too graphic in order to avoid an X rating, now known as NC-17. Despite this, Friday the 13th has built one of the largest and most dedicated cult fan bases of the slasher horror genre. This can be attributed to the forbidden nature of these films, which would create a mystique that would draw in younger fans. It would be this formulaic nature of slasher films that would almost kill off the genre entirely and subject it to ridicule by the beginning of the 1990s. Previously mentioned Wes Craven would go on to create the 1996 slasher film, Scream, which would parody the genre by having its characters make fun of the tropes and downplay slasher films altogether. History lessons aside, the subgenre of horror, with all its tropes and violence, was a particular favourite between Wes Keltner and Ronnie Hobbs. Don't worry, I haven't forgotten about them. The duo, who shared a similar love and history for the horror genre of film after consuming a wide variety of it from a young and impressionable age, had begun to create their 80s slasher game concept, believing it to be a void in the market as there were no other video games with this particular setting being published by companies at the time. For research, Keltner and Hobbs would consume as much slasher media as they possibly could, going frame by frame in order to pick up the most prevalent aesthetics and tropes that would best fit their creative vision and translate into set pieces and mechanics for a video game. From a technical standpoint, the concept featured a unique aspect that aimed to fill another gap in the market, as it was being designed as an asymmetrical multiplayer game. Differing from typical team-based multiplayer experiences, where both sides are of equal number and play identically with the same gameplay mechanics, asymmetrical multiplayer differed in that both sides were purposefully lopsided, having one team comprised of numerous players, while the opposing team could comprise of as little as one player. With this setup, the majority team are made underpowered, with the same conventional gameplay mechanics as each other, while the minority team are made overpowered with their own specified mechanics. This asymmetrical multiplayer-based 80s slasher horror game would finally be brought into the pre-alpha stage, a point in a video game's development where game creators toy with and prototype concepts and mechanics before bringing them into reality. Gun Media's fourth foray in video game publishing, while being built upon countless hours and frames of American slasher, would heavily borrow, if not outright replicate, one specific franchise. Set in the year 1984, in the fictional location of Camp Forest Green, the first of what would appear to be an anthology video game series would find its setting with the title of Slasher Volume 1, Summer Camp. As if to eliminate all doubt, Wes Keltner himself would declare Summer Camp Gun Media's personal homage to said specific franchise. Quote, "This is my love letter to the Friday the 13th series." On the Halloween of 2014, Gun Media would unveil the reveal trailer for Slasher Volume 1 Summer Camp via their own and various gaming news outlet channels via YouTube for the first time.
No one is safe. No one will survive. Because at summer camp, your sleeping bag will be your body bag.
While no gameplay was featured, it effectively established the slasher aesthetics and Friday the 13th adjacent setting that Keltner and Hobbs were aiming for. Further details on Summer Camp's asymmetrical multiplayer gameplay and emulation of Friday the 13th were unveiled in the May of 2015. It would consist of 2 teams, 7 player-controlled camp counselors and 1 player-controlled slasher villain, simply dubbed the Killer. The counselors had the shared goal of surviving the killer's murder spree, working either together or individually, in order to find a means to fight against the killer and escape Camp Forest Green. Counsellors could find weapons to defend themselves and vehicles that could be repaired and used to escape the camp and survive. The killer would have the simple goal of hunting down and killing as many of the camp counsellors as possible, utilising a number of traps and weapons, murdering them in a variety of creative and violent ways, akin to Jason Voorhees. Pre-alpha images would reveal in-game locations in Summer Camp, simulating Friday the 13th's low-budget production and 1980s film aesthetic, complete with film grain and muted colour akin to that of an old VHS. The reveal trailer, reminiscent of film trailers released for Friday the 13th, would display many interesting aspects of summer camp's early development, as the primary goal of the game was to create an experience as reminiscent to Friday the 13th as possible. Gun Media believed they needed individuals from the film industry that were directly involved in Friday the 13th's production. With this in mind, the company planned to bring 3 notable individuals on board the summer camp project. Through the announcement trailer, it was initially revealed that 2 film industry veterans, Tom Savini and Harry Manfredini, were already working on the project. Tom Savini, a renaissance man in the horror industry, has worked as a makeup artist, special effects technician, actor, stunt performer, and director on a variety of films from the past 5 decades. He had worked alongside filmmaker George A. Romero, the man responsible for pioneering the image of zombies in modern horror. Dubbed the Sultan of Splatter by his contemporaries, Savini is perhaps best known for his groundbreaking work in blood and gore special effects and makeup. A former combat photographer during the Vietnam War, he witnessed and shot horrendous scenes of damage to American and Vietnamese soldiers. This inspired him to begin practicing special effects makeup while on tour, and would eventually credit his focus on realism and practical blood and gore effects to his time during the war. In the early days of his makeup artist career, Savini would be brought on to produce special effects for the original Friday the 13th, on the back of his work with George A. Romero in the 1978 film Dawn of the Dead. In this capacity, he was responsible for some of the most iconic kills in the franchise. Perhaps his most significant contribution to the film was suggesting a twist ending where a young Jason Voorhees appears to drown the final girl in a dream sequence. With this final scene being added to the script, Savini would design the makeup for the character, establishing Jason's deformed appearance that would remain throughout the rest of the franchise. Savini would also return to contribute special effects and makeup in Friday the 13th's 4th installment, the 1984 film Friday the 13th, The Final Chapter. With this experience, and ultimately the responsibility of creating Jason Voorhees in mind, Savini would be brought on in the early days of summer camp's creation as an executive producer and visual effects supervisor. Harry Manfredini, a career composer, has been credited in creating scores for over 100 films, beginning with the 1976 film Through the Looking Glass. He would eventually specialise in creating scores for horror films, with the original Friday the 13th, where his iconic orchestral style of haunting string instruments with sudden striking moments would become the standard for every Friday the 13th film moving forward. The original Friday the 13th score was written and recorded by Manfredini in a matter of weeks. He would also create the iconographic sound effect of Jason Voorhees' presence in the films with the sound K and Ma being shorthand for the quote, "Kill her mommy."
Kill her, mommy. Kill her.
K for kill, Ma for mommy. However, this would later be lost in translation and become ch ah instead. Whether it should be k ma or ch ah is a subject that is debated to this day. As Manfredini was responsible for creating the score for every Friday the 13th installment, -1, he would be brought on to create an original score reminiscent of the original films for summer camp.
Uh-oh, gotta get back to work.
To complete the ensemble of Friday veterans, Gun Media released a video on February 4th, 2015 that featured actor and stuntman Kane Hodder, who is renowned as the most iconic actor to play the role of Jason Voorhees in the franchise, announcing his involvement in the project.
Hey, Kane Hodder here. I just want to let fans around the world know that I'm going to be the killer in the upcoming video game Summer Camp. I'm gonna kill every one of you motherfuckers.
Voorhees has been portrayed by a number of actors throughout the series, but Hodder has played the character 4 consecutive times, the most of any actor in the role. As such, his large figure, foreboding presence, and commanding body language would become hallmarks for the character. These physical qualities would come into play once again, as Hodder was chosen to portray the role of the killer, with Hodder himself saying, quote, "Everyone has their own skills. One of mine happens to be killing people on screen. It was at this point that Gun Media would reveal their utilisation of motion capture, a process where the actions of human actors wearing reflective markers are recorded and later used to animate the characters seen in-game, allowing for realistic and complex movement. In this capacity, Kane Hodder and Tom Savini would work together in creating and performing the kills that would be used in summer camp. Kane Hodder would perform motion capture alongside actor Ryan Statz and actress Tara Page, who would portray male and female camp counsellors, respectively. Further on the technical side of summer camp's development, Gun Media had sought out game developers capable of realising the game's unique asymmetrical multiplayer design, an emerging gameplay mechanic not often seen in contemporary games at the time. For this task, Gun Media would recruit developer company IllFonic. Established in the state of Colorado in 2007, IllFonic's game development portfolio would begin in 2012 with the release of Next Quiz, a first-person shooter remake of a popular 2005 free game modification of the same name. A modification, better known by the shorthand mod, is a fan-made alternation that changes one or many aspects of a video game, ranging from small visual changes and tweaks to, in the case of Next Quiz, a complete overhaul that fundamentally changes the base game. Developed by a group of independent modders, colloquially named Alien Trap, the Next Quiz mod utilised the Quake engine, a software network used to power the 1996 first-person shooter game, Quake, which was developed by video game developer id Software. Video game mods are complicated, what can I say? IllFonic's Next Quiz remake would see its online servers shut down only a year after its release due to the game's publisher, THQ, going bankrupt in 2013. This, coupled with Next Quiz's controversy of charging players for a previously free game, alongside developers of the original mod creating a spiritual successor to the series titled Zoonotic in response to the Next Quiz remake's development, would result in a lukewarm beginning for IllFonic as a developer. The company would begin functioning as a supportive game developer in 2015, assisting in the development of games alongside other companies. The most notable example being the 2015 first-person shooter game, Evolve, which utilised asymmetrical multiplayer mechanics featuring teams of 4 players versus one player-controlled monster. One of the only games on the market to utilise this gameplay design at the time. Evolve would be chiefly developed by a company named Turtle Rock Studios, who are known for developing one of the most notable asymmetrical multiplayer games in 2007, titled Left 4 Dead, published by Valve. With this understanding of asymmetrical gameplay in their repertoire, Gun Media would select IllFonic as the candidate for bringing this gameplay principle into reality for Summer Camp as its developer. Keltner and Hobbs would reach out to IllFonic's creative director, a man named Kedrin Gonzalez, to pitch him the concept. The trio would quickly hit it off, as Gonzalez was quote, super metal, and was immediately on board with the concept. In the midst of the game's initial reveal trailer, word quickly began to spread on the internet that a Friday the 13th-esque multiplayer game was in development, and excitement began to grow at an early stage, both from the gaming community and the horror community. This, coupled with new behind-the-scenes developments of the game that would effectively change the trajectory of both the game and Gun Media's futures permanently, would instigate plans to garner support in one aspect that Summer Camp was sorely missing: money. With the building online hype within the video game and horror communities surrounding the title, Gun Media executive producer Randy Greenback would instigate 3 months of planning for a crowdfunding initiative alongside Summer Camp's pre-alpha stage, composed of audience research, budgeting, crowdfunding stretch goals, and potential reward tiers for backers. During the build-up of Summer Camp's crowdfunding reveal, Gun Media would instigate anticipation via a website consisting solely of a VHS player containing a Summer Camp tape and a countdown. The VHS player featured a prompt for visitors to submit their email address in order to be notified of the countdown's end. These behind-the-scenes developments during Summer Camp's pre-alpha stage would come to light and completely change the game. Sometime during Summer Camp's development, previously mentioned Harry Manfredini would bump into an old friend and collaborator during a convention, a man named Sean Sexton Cunningham, better known simply as Sean S. Cunningham. Cunningham is perhaps best known as the producer and director of the original Friday the 13th. As such, Cunningham was then the holder of Friday the 13th's intellectual property rights, and was thus credited and regarded as the creator of the franchise. After being made aware of Summer Camp's development, Gun Media would receive an email from a party affiliated with Cunningham in early 2015, which the company initially ignored due to speculation on its authenticity. They would frequently debate the email and its contents during monthly meetings, pondering if Summer Camp was in jeopardy due to its clear similarities to Friday the 14th, until Cunningham contacted them personally. Cunningham in fact loved the concept of Summer Camp and its existence as a love letter to his franchise, stating, quote, "You've got the band together, but you're missing the lead singer." Thus, after several meetings between Cunningham and the Gun Media team, Cunningham offered the Friday the 13th license and his presence as producer to Gun Media, albeit without financial backing. As a result, upon the completion of Gun Media's Mystery Countdown, it was revealed through a new announcement trailer on October 13th that Slasher Volume 1 Summer Camp would be officially rebranded to Friday the 14th, the game.
They're just kids, right? So was he. He was just an innocent boy. I was a good mother to him. My boy. My sweet, sweet Jason.
The first video game adaptation of the franchise since previously mentioned LJN's ill-fated release 28 years prior. This announcement would reveal the true nature of the game's crowdfunding campaign. While Summer Camp was already well invested financially, receiving the keys to a slasher franchise that ultimately served as the prime inspiration for the game, with no financial backing to go along with it, would lead the developers to garner support from fans in order to craft the title, formerly known as Summer Camp, into a game that contained features and content that complemented Friday the 14th. Camp Forest Green would eventually evolve into the iconic setting seen throughout the films, named Camp Crystal Lake, with the previously mentioned Kane Hodder being promoted from the role of the killer to Jason Voorhees, his first return to the character in 14 years. Gun Media would launch their crowdfunding campaign via the sites Kickstarter and BackerKit on the same day of Friday the 13th, the game's announcement, unveiling the various stretch goals that would be implemented into the final product, as well as a slated release of October 2016. Further in-game images that retained the design of Summer Camp, combined with newly crafted in-game models of Jason Voorhees, concept art of stereotypical slasher horror characters, and interviews featuring the Gun Media crew, Friday the 13th's production alumni, and the Elphonic crew would be revealed. On the monetary side, the campaigns would reveal Gun Media's planned budget, with the first goal being set to $700,000, which would lead to the title's completed development, with a slated release window being 1 year. The race to garner fan support and guarantee the game's completion had begun. The success of the game's crowdfunding campaign cannot be understated. By the end of the Kickstarter and BackerKit campaigns, 12,218 and 18,068 backers would provide funding on both sites, respectively. Friday the 13th, the game would earn the respectable, if not oddly specific, accolade of becoming the 179th most crowdfunded project of all time, earning $823,704 through Kickstarter and $422,866 through BackerKit, resulting in a combined total of $1,246,570, over $500,000 more than Gun Media's slated budget for completing the game. While it can be said that the promise of an 80s slasher horror multiplayer game featuring the genre's most prolific killer was enough for backers to offer funds, Randy Greenback's efforts in planning and organising specific crowdfunding incentives and rewards proved instrumental in achieving significant funding for Friday the 13th. To gain an understanding as to how these incentives made Friday the 13th the game's crowdfunding campaign so successful, we can purvey the numerous physical and digital rewards that enticed backers into supporting the game. Some rewards were exclusive, some were stretch goals that when reached would be implemented as content into the game itself. Some were reasonably priced, some not so much. The previously mentioned stretch goal list would display a smorgasbord of content incentives that would be developed, so long as the incentive was met. This included a behind-the-scenes interview with previously mentioned Tom Savini in his workshop, iconic kills seen throughout the film franchise, such as the infamous sleeping bag kill, where Jason slams his victim into a tree, original kill concepts designed by Tom Savini, a variety of playable Jason Voorheeses seen throughout the Friday films, a variety of settings seen throughout the films, such as Manhattan from the 1989 film, Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan, playable characters from the films, most notably Tommy Jarvis, the only character in the franchise that served as a foil to Jason Voorhees and appeared in 3 consecutive films, the ability to play killers outside of Jason, particularly Pamela Voorhees, the killer in the debut film and Jason's mother, a revised and playable version of LJN's 1989 Friday the 13th game, and more. The stretch goal list ran up to $5,500,050. Despite this goal not being met during the campaign, several elements of the list that weren't reached monetarily would be implemented during the game's release. Physical incentives include a $60 disc copy of the game for PC, PlayStation 4 or Xbox One, an $18 original game soundtrack composed by previously mentioned Harry Manfredini on CD, a $49 physical art book containing concept art for the game, a $120 exclusive collector's edition steel case copy of the game, which could also be signed by the development team in specified reward tiers, a $500 chance to become a virtual team member during the game's creation, exclusive to 20 backers, where said backers may access sessions with the game's designers and developers for the online video call application Skype, a $2,500 development team hangout limited to 12 backers, where said backer and one guest could travel to Elphonic Studio in Denver, Colorado to hang out with the Elphonic and Gun Media teams, a $6,000 horror icon dinner limited to 4 backers, where said backer could attend a dinner in Hollywood with a Friday the 13th veteran of their choice, and a $7,500 chance to attend the game's launch party with Gun Media, Elphonic and the Friday veterans, limited to 4 backers. Digital incentives include a $15 PC exclusive access to the Virtual Cabin, a first-person in-game virtual environment that functioned as a development diary. Backers could explore their own cabin on Camp Crystal Lake, complete with in-game 3D models of weapons, camp counselors, and Jason Voorhees, as well as developer commentary from Gun Media, Elphonic, and the Friday veterans during the game's development. A $30 digital key for the game, a $9 clothing pack for the camp counselors in-game, a $20 digital MP3 and PDF pack of the game's soundtrack and art book, a $6 original and exclusive playable Jason Voorhees character designed by Tom Savini, which depicted Jason after his escape from hell in the 1993 film Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday. Yeah, I don't think I mentioned that yet. Jason Goes to Hell at one point. Also, you know I had to buy that one. A $2,000 opportunity to become a victim of Jason Voorhees, where the backer's name is immortalised on a tombstone in-game, as well as working alongside the developers to create an in-game achievement, a digital reward earned by players for completing a specified task, limited to 5 backers. A $5,000 opportunity for one backer to design a kill for Jason Voorhees alongside Tom Savini, and for a whopping $10,000, 4 backers were given the opportunity to become playable characters in-game, working alongside the developers to become 80s style camp counselors with their own specified in-game statistics. These high-ticket backing incentives would also come complete with all previously mentioned rewards. While some of these incentives featured high price tags, the majority were purchased by eager backers hoping to become immortalised within the game or hold an exclusive piece of historic memorabilia. The allure of these high-priced incentives proved so successful that the campaign's most expensive rewards were all sold out by the end of the campaign. As stated previously, Friday the 13th had already garnered a loyal and fervent community of fans spanning across several generations. The crowdfunding campaign would ultimately display the emerging amalgamation of both the realms of slasher cinema and video game communities, which would lead to the game adaptation's rapid crowdfunding success and display the willingness of both horror and video game fans to spend large sums of money in order to bring the game into reality, becoming intimately involved in its development and meet with slasher horror icons. Randy Greenback would work to further galvanise the emerging community aspect of Friday the 13th the game via frequent updates and interactions with backers through Kickstarter, providing detailed updates on the game's art, animation, design and engineering process, concept art for playable camp counsellors, overview videos for various gameplay elements, schedules for weekly live sessions for the online live streaming service, Twitch, where Greenback would play a variety of retro and modern horror games, and more. Gun Media would also provide a plethora of promotional material during the campaign via their personal YouTube channel that provided a unique lens into both the worlds of horror cinema and video game development, giving viewers and individuals anticipating the game's release a more intimate understanding of those working behind the scenes. A variety of interviews led by video game journalist Adam Sessler, known for his work on the video game-centric television channel G4, would pair Sean S. Cunningham, Tom Savini, Harry Manfredini and Kane Hodder, alongside Wes Keltner, Robbie Hobbs and Randy Greenback, as they discuss various aspects of their work in the Friday films and the Friday game. Sessler would also host a roundtable discussion with the Friday veterans and Gun Media, including previously mentioned Kedrin Gonzalez of Elphonic, where the group would discuss the history of Friday the 13th's production and its relation to the game's development. Elphonic would also contribute their own behind-the-scenes developments from their studio in Colorado, featuring Gonzalez and a number of Elphonic developers. By November 15th, only a month after the crowdfunding campaign's launch, Friday the 13th the game had become funded, and the campaign would conclude hours after reaching the $700,000 goal. The campaign would then switch to slacker backer funding, where potential backers late to the crowdfunding campaign may continue to buy incentives beyond the crowdfunding period, providing Gun Media with further financial support upon reaching its initial funding goal. Rather than the potentially disparaging moniker of slacker backers, the team would affectionately refer to late backers as slasher backers. Entering 2016, the dev teams at Gun Media and Elphonic would attend a series of panels at the Gaming Culture Festival, PAX, namely the festival based in Seattle, Washington, known as PAX West, the festival based in Boston, Massachusetts, known as PAX East, and the now defunct festival based in San Antonio, Texas, known as PAX South. These panels would give the developers a public platform to share the game's complex development history with festival goers, with each panel providing new behind-the-scenes developments. Keltner and Hobbs would then finally attain the video game development milestone the duo had been fantasizing about since 2000. Rather than sneaking through the back door to liaise with other developers, Gun Media would attend E3 2016 to premiere gameplay footage of Jason Voorhees for the first time, unveiling gameplay mechanics heavily inspired by the Friday the 13th franchise's infamous tropes and the team's attention to detail in translating film to game, such as Jason's toolkit featuring the ability to teleport across the game world, mirroring his propensity to suddenly disappear and reappear while chasing his victims. Finally, after years of development and campaigning, with the game's estimated release of fall 2016 becoming delayed and fan anticipation continuing to build, Friday the 13th the game would be unleashed upon players on May 26, 2017. What you are currently witnessing is the main menu screen for Friday the 13th the game, and, as was the case for a majority of players on release day, this was the only thing you would see for some time. Upon the game's initial release, the sheer number of player logins would overwhelm the game's servers, resulting in a database login failure. This issue was particularly prevalent on consoles. This server issue would occur through user profiles that had initially purchased the game, forcing players to find workarounds in order to play, primarily by utilising alternate accounts in order to bypass this issue. Even still, users attempting to find online matches would face further issues due to the inability for players to log in and play. These server issues would persist for the first few days of the game's release, leading to the game's official account on the social media platform X carrying out damage control as they updated players on the status of the game's server, as the dev teams worked to accommodate the high number of players attempting to play online. An outpouring of complaints and animosity, particularly from backers of the game, would begin to manifest online and be quickly responded to by the developers. While the game servers would finally stabilise, and a free content update that would allow players to play the iconic purple and cyan Jason Voorhees, as seen in the original LGN game, would be provided as an apology from Gun Media, these technical issues would not be resolved for long. Before we explore further details on the game's initial release, it is important to first paint a full picture of Friday the 13th's gameplay and mechanics for Jason Voorhees and the camp counsellors in order to better understand the game as a whole, initial opinions on its release, and the further technical issues that would soon manifest themselves. As stated previously, it had been decided early in the game's development that Friday the 13th the game would feature asymmetrical multiplayer, consisting of one team of 7 players as camp counsellors against one player as Jason Voorhees. On release, players could choose to play one of 10 counsellors, initially starting with 4, with the rest being unlocked later. 2 of these counsellors, named Kenny Rydell and Eric J.R. LaChapa, are modelled after those who paid the $10,000 crowdfunding tier to become characters in-game. Each character is inspired by various victims and character cliches seen in the Friday the 13th movie series. They are equipped with various statistics that determine how the counsellor will perform in-game, and allow players to choose their preferred playstyle. These statistics include their movement speed, ability to repair broken items, luck in finding useful items, ability to keep composed in the presence of Jason, and more. Therefore, theoretically, if one desired to repair an escape vehicle efficiently, they may play Eric LaChapa, who is a 10 out of 10 in repair. If they desire to escape Jason's clutches, they may play Vanessa Jones, who is a 10 out of 10 in speed. In-game, players are situated in various locations seen throughout the films, such as the iconic Crystal Lake, seen in the franchise's debut. Counsellors have various options available in order to survive the night and escape Jason. Navigating through homes, lodges and forests, counsellors must coordinate and work together in order to repair an escape vehicle, either a car or motorboat, by finding parts scattered across the area and driving away from the map. Players may also contact the authorities and survive until their arrival, where players must navigate their way towards them without getting killed. In order to survive Jason's onslaught, counsellors can only run and hide from his clutches. To do this, they must use the map to their advantage, hiding under beds and inside closets, making as little noise as possible and maintaining their composure by keeping out of Jason's sight. The more noise counsellors make, and the more terrified they become, the easier it becomes for Jason to track them. Counsellors aren't completely defenceless. Throughout the game, they can scavenge for a variety of weapons and distractions they can use to attack Jason and temporarily stun or mislead him, making for a quick escape. Players may also utilise a variety of perks unlocked at random through spending experience points earned by playing the game. These perks have varying rarities that affect how powerful they are. These perks change player performance in a variety of ways, such as less chance of being detected by Jason, starting the game with a weapon, lowering the length of time it takes for the authorities to arrive, and more. Players may contact the previously mentioned Tommy Jarvis, as he is seen in the 1986 film Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives. The actor for Jarvis, a man named Tom Matthews, returns to voice the character. A random deceased or escaped player is chosen to play Jarvis, giving them a second chance to escape. Jarvis is the highest performing character in the game, with completely maxed out stats. Counsellors also have one final option to survive the night. kill Jason Voorhees. This process is lengthy, difficult, and requires careful coordination amongst players. Players must acquire the sweater of Jason's deceased mother from his shack. However, Jason will be immediately alerted as soon as someone steps into his home. Therefore, players must acquire Jason's hockey mask, which is achieved by attacking him with blunt weapons, such as baseball bats. The player with the hockey mask in their inventory may enter the shack without alerting Jason. Players must then summon Tommy Jarvis and survive until his arrival. Jarvis must then find a sharp weapon, such as a machete. Then, Jason must be distracted by a female counselor wearing the sweater, something which occurs in the 1981 film Friday the 13th Part 2. Once stunned, Jason must be brought to his knees by attacking him. Finally, Tommy must deliver the final blow with his sharp weapon. Complicated? Yes. Cool as fuck? Yes. Players controlling Jason have only one goal: kill everyone in sight, as many as possible. It isn't necessary for Jason to kill all 7 counselors, the only conditions for failure being every counselor escaping or, in rare cases, Jason's demise. On release, players may choose one of 6 iterations of Jason throughout the film series to play, 7 including the backer exclusive Jason, designed by Tom Savini. Each Jason utilises a weapon unique to their film appearance and are equipped with a variety of strengths and weaknesses associated with their respective films, such as the ability to run. You heard right, the ability to run. Because Jason Voorhees is notorious for not running, some Jasons don't run, although in the earlier installments of the franchise, Jason does run. Thus, these Jasons can run. Make sense? If it doesn't, watch the films. Each Jason also features improvements or handicaps to their abilities in-game. Jason has 4 abilities he can utilise to better track and hunt down counselors. These abilities unlock one by one as more time passes in the game. Jason can teleport across the map, sense the locations of players and where they are hiding, fly across the map, and silently stalk unsuspecting players. Jason can utilise bear traps and throwing knives, and brutalise counsellors in a variety of creative ways, as well as prevent counsellors from escaping via car or boat. With this understanding of Friday the 13th the game's premise in mind, how successful was the title upon release? How did it compare to previous efforts released by Gun Media and Elphonic? Did it live up to the high expectations of backers, gaming, and horror enthusiasts? Needless to say, Friday the 13th the game received a far warmer welcome in its salad days compared to the likes of previously mentioned Speakeasy and Next Quiz. Game journalists praised the title's attention and care in replicating the aesthetics and style of the original film franchise, the power fantasy gameplay experience as Jason Voorhees, and the engaging cooperative experience as camp counselors. However, a significant number of these initial reviews were mixed, citing Friday the 13th the game as a title with potential as opposed to a solid experience across the board. This mixed reception is attributed to numerous factors, such as players and journalists alike complaining that they were spending too much time escaping Jason and not enough time playing Jason, due to the meagre 12.5% chance of being selected to play him per game. Many also looked to fierce and steady competition that had emerged prior to the game's release as a threat to its future. The competition in question was an asymmetrical online multiplayer game released exclusively on PC during Friday the 13th's crowdfunding campaign on June 14th, 2016, titled Dead by Daylight. The game, published by Canadian studio Behaviour Interactive, followed the same basic gameplay principles as its rival, featuring a team of 4 survivors against 1 killer. The 2 titles differed in that Dead by Daylight featured original concepts for killers and gameplay scenarios, giving the licensed title of Friday the 13th an advantage by featuring a renowned slasher horror intellectual property. By the game's release, however, Dead by Daylight had grown rapidly. The game would release to consoles on June 20th, 2017, a mere month after Friday the 13th the game's release, and had been steadily releasing new killers and survivors as downloadable content, including its first licensed killer, the antagonist of the previously mentioned slasher horror franchise, Halloween, Michael Myers. By November, Dead by Daylight would surpass 3 million sold copies and include 2 more licensed slasher villains, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre's Leatherface and A Nightmare on Elm Street's Freddy Krueger. Dead by Daylight would continue to compete with Friday the 13th the game from then on, and would frequently become an example used by players as to how its rival could be improved. The largest single point of contention for Friday the 13th's release, however, was the significant technical issues and glitches that would occur on release and beyond. These glitches were so apparent and appeared so frequently that it was harder for players to find a game that functioned as intended throughout its entirety than not. Some of these glitches were purely visual in nature and provided unintentional comedy to Friday the 13th's immersive slasher horror world. Minor bizarre moments, such as Jason grabbing a camp counselor by the neck, intending to lift them into the air, only to defy nature by doing this. Or ridiculous scenarios where ragdoll physics, otherwise known as the procedural animation where characters flail freely upon death, going utterly haywire. Other glitches, however, were game-breaking and would either derail the game completely or provide an unfair advantage to Jason or the counselors, from escape vehicles becoming unusable to impossible vantage points. These glitches would frequently occur and even be utilised as exploits by players. These technical issues would ultimately serve as the primary source of animosity from the game's community, leading to vocalisations of outcry towards Gun Media, who would be accused of taking on an intellectual property they had no business in using. Despite the immense competition, outcry on social media platforms, and constant action against technical issues and exploits, Friday the 13th the game would enjoy a healthy player base, and the developers would continue to push a variety of streamers and content creators playing the game, with Wes Keltner and Ronnie Hobbs even appearing on some of these creators' YouTube channels to give interviews. Friday the 13th the game would soldier on throughout the rest of 2017, providing updates, downloadable content, and free content along the way. On September 21st, Gun Media would enable outfit customization for camp counselors, providing further replayability for players by introducing clothing options that may be unlocked by progressing in-game. This would also include the paid downloadable content pack titled Spring Break 1984, which included beachwear for all characters. More clothing pack DLC would be developed throughout the game's history. Players could also utilise emotes in-game, allowing for better communication without the use of microphones, as well as busting a few moves. You know, for the culture. The free maps provided in the base game would also receive smaller variants. These would be approximately 40% smaller than their larger counterparts, and would encourage more intense and fast-paced gameplay experiences. On Friday the 13th of October, Jason Voorhees, as depicted in Friday the 13th The Final Chapter, is introduced, alongside a new map and camp counselor. On October 25th, the first playable camp counselor from the film franchise would be added, the character Fox from the 1982 film Friday the 13th Part 3. Future additions to the camp counselor roster would also feature characters from the film franchise. On October 27th, a new game mode titled Paranoia would be teased. While no details on the mode would be revealed, it was assumed there would be a social deduction game consisting of one camp counselor murdering their contemporaries while attempting to appear innocent. This scenario mirrored the plot of the 1985 film Friday the 13th Part 5 A New Beginning, as the mode's teaser heavily featured the identifiable hockey mask seen in this film, which featured 3 blue chevrons as opposed to the typical single red chevron. Part 5 featured a copycat killer disguised as Jason Voorhees, whose spree would be seemingly adopted by Tommy Jarvis at the end of the film. Of course, this concept of a Jason Voorhees copycat killer was never realised. On November 17th, Friday the 13th the game would surpass all shortcomings and win the Best Independent Game Award at the Golden Joysticks, a video game awards ceremony that has celebrated outstanding achievements in the industry since 1983. 1 month later, the dev team would introduce a new rendition of the Virtual Cabin crowdfunding incentive as a free-to-play mode titled Virtual Cabin 2.0. Much like the crowdfunding incentive, Virtual Cabin 2.0 would allow players to explore a camp cabin from a first-person perspective. The cabin would be laden with items of interest, that would provide further context on the development of the game and the film franchise, and would even include a multi-step Easter egg or hidden objective that, when completed, would reveal the game's most ambitious and significant update at the time. Players would find themselves on board, of all things, a spaceship. After some further exploration, they are apprehended by a cyborg Jason Voorhees and killed. This would complete the virtual cabin quest and reveal that content from the 2001 film Jason X, which features Jason Voorhees in the future year of 2455 on a spaceship called the Grendel, eventually being transformed by nanobots into an unstoppable metal killing machine known simply as Uber Jason, would be coming soon to Friday the 13th the game. As you may assume, this particular setting is an incongruous derailment from the aesthetics and tropes of the film franchise and the game itself, sending camp counselors of the 1980s into the vast reaches of outer space in the 25th century would promise an exciting new direction for the game and exciting possibilities for adapting the films. Closing out 2017 with a variety of choice awards, including the horror-focused news site's Bloody Disgusting's Best Video Game Award and video game news site's IGN's Best Multiplayer Game, Friday the 13th had finally surpassed its rocky beginnings and was rapidly evolving into the long-desired slasher horror asymmetrical multiplayer game that was promised by Gun Media in 2015. 2018 promised to be a year of progress and excitement for gaming and horror fans, as well as the team at Gun Media, who had finally established themselves as a premier video game publisher. Friday the 13th the game would enter the new year innocuously, with Gun Media continuing to liaise with fans, showcasing artwork and cosplay efforts through social media, and updating the game with new content. The previously mentioned Jason Voorhees copycat killer, the character Roy Burns, would be added to the roster of playable Jasons on January 30th. This iteration of Jason, depicted as wearing a blue boiler suit akin to Michael Myers, would result in major outcry on behalf of horror aficionados. This scenario would truly display the obsessive attention to detail held by fans of slasher, and particularly Friday the 13th. Believe it or not, it has been a major debate between fans as to what colour Roy's boiler suit actually is. This long embattled debate consists of two sides. One side insists that Roy's boiler suit is blue, as previously stated. The other side insists that Roy's boiler suit is spruce green. The source of this debate comes from the specific lighting of scenes within Friday the 13th Part 5, where certain shots in the film make Roy's boiler suit appear blue. Other shots in the film make it difficult to decipher whether the suit is blue or green. While the source of this quotation is seemingly missing, the actor that portrayed Roy Burns, a man named Dick Wyand, has seemingly confirmed that the suit was green, not blue. Despite this, the war of the suits rages on to this day. Thus, the decision to make Roy's suit blue in the game would cause an uproar, and despite being seemingly inconsequential, Gun Media would address the issue and actually include Roy's green boiler suit as an optional skin for the character. While this scenario appears to be a meagre microcosm in the game's history, it is perhaps the single most prevalent example of the analytical nature of horror fans and Gun Media's attention to this meticulous corner of horror fandom. 2018 would continue to provide minor updates and game balance reworkings. Content updates include a new camp counselor and the long-promised single-player challenge mode, which would feature the player killing camp counselors as Jason in a variety of scenarios. The player must complete a series of objectives, dubbed Skull Objectives, in order to complete these challenges. This would be included on May 24th. However, the future of Friday the 13th the game would come to a sudden and dramatic halt. Despite a slew of content being teased and subsequently worked on behind the scenes, a major court battle had been taking place outside of the game's development that jeopardised its very existence. Throughout the franchise's history, previously mentioned Sean S. Cunningham has been championed as the sole originator of everything Friday the 13th, including the characters Jason and Pamela Voorhees. However, it is the screenwriter of the franchise's debut film, a man named Victor Miller, that is primarily responsible for the film's plot, and thus the characters featured within the film. Despite this, Miller owned no rights to the original film's script, despite his instrumental involvement in the film's creation. In 1979, Miller was approached by the Manny Company, an entity formed by Cunningham, to write the screenplay for Friday the 13th. As Miller was a member of the Screenwriters Union, known as the Writers Guild of America, he executed a writer's flat deal contract with the Manny Company. Cunningham was present for this contract as a signatory. This contract effectively ensured Miller would be paid for his commission and grant the copyright of his screenplay to the company, meaning that Miller may terminate his copyright grant at his discretion. The rights to the original film and its screenplay would later pass on to the Manny Company's successor, Horror Inc. In 2016, Miller sought to terminate his copyright grant of the film's screenplay through the Copyright Law of 1976, which states that an offer of work may petition to transfer the copyright to them after 35 years. His claim would be taken to court by Horror Inc., claiming Miller had no right to his screenplay as he was working for hire within the Manny Company, as opposed to being commissioned directly. Simply put, Cunningham claimed to own the rights, as the screenplay was his own concept, while Miller simply wrote the script. The case would be taken to the United States District Court for the District of Connecticut in 2018, after Miller established a counterclaim declaring that his copyright claim was valid due to functioning as an independent contractor. As Miller and Cunningham's original 1979 contract did not state that the screenplay was a work made for hire, Miller had a legitimate claim to the rights of his script. As Friday the 13th the game was licensed through Cunningham, the intellectual property would fall into the crosshairs of this legal dispute. As a result, Gun Media would release a statement on June 11th that all future content for the game would be cancelled, and only continued maintenance and bug fixing would be implemented moving forward. In short, the game was brought to a complete standstill, with no new content coming forward. On June 21st, Wes Keltner himself would issue a statement. Is there a chance of any new content being added to the game if a ruling on the dispute occurs in the near future? The answer is no. We can't keep building content that may never see the light of day. That's bad business. By September 28th, the court ruled that the screenplay for the original Friday the 13th film reverted to Miller, that the script was not work for hire, and that Miller validly terminated his original 1979 grant of rights. The case was finally concluded 3 years later, on September 30th, 2021. Victor Miller would leave, retaining the rights to the original Friday the 13th screenplay, while Sean S. Cunningham would retain the rights to the title and its characters. After the September 28th ruling, Horror Inc. would also release a statement on October 4th, containing stinging opinions on its conclusion, and effectively blaming Miller as the reason for Friday the 13th the game's predicament. Despite it being clear that Miller had been attempting to reacquire his copyrighted work since 2016, around the time Cunningham handed the intellectual property rights to Gun Media, Horror Inc. concluded that while Miller only retained copyright for the original film's screenplay, certain content for the game had become complicated to implement, and due to Miller's refusal to talk to Cunningham, there was no clear evidence that new content or even further funding of the game on behalf of Gun Media would be possible. Moving forward in 2018, Friday the 13th would live a quiet and uneventful existence after implementing its final promised update: dedicated servers for online games, meaning that games would be hosted solely by Gun Media rather than peer-to-peer hosting. It had been a long-standing complaint that once a game host left the game, the entire game would end. Thus, these dedicated servers would prevent this issue. From this point on, only game maintenance and bug fixes would be implemented. On September 25th, in the face of the franchise's legal trouble, Elphonic would officially step back from Friday the 13th the game after completing all contracted work for Gun Media. Elphonic would be replaced by Japanese game developer Black Tower Studios, who had been assisting Elphonic in the game's development in the past year. Friday the 13th would see significant price slashes on several game platforms moving forward, and Gun Media would continue sharing artistic efforts from fans, as well as giveaways for DLC content. The game would see its final console release on August 13th, 2019 for the Nintendo Switch, a full circle moment as Friday the 13th would release on a Nintendo console for the first time since LJN's effort 20 years past. On November 3rd, 2020, Gun Media's new lead community developer, a man named Matt Shawcha, would release a statement on the future of the game. Gun Media would decommission the game's dedicated servers due to the expense of running them, and the game would be receiving its final patch that month. After this, the game's dedicated forums would be archived, and all social media channels would continue to function for necessary announcements only. On June 8th, 2023, Gun Media would release a statement declaring that the intellectual property license for Friday the 13th the game would expire on December 31st of that year. On that date, Friday the 13th would no longer be available for physical or digital purchase. As a final farewell for players, Gun Media would distribute all unlockable rewards and rarest perks for free. At the time of this video, Friday the 13th the game will continue to function until at least December 31st, 2024. Upon this date, the game will be a mere 7 years old. The previously teased content based on Jason X would never be released. And, much like the previously explored Jason Voorhees copycat killer plot in Part 5, the Paranoia game mode would never be revealed. While Friday the 13th the game would see a sudden, unexpected and slow death, the impact of the game on its developers cannot be understated. Gun Media, now doing business as Gun Interactive since 2021, would move on from their loss and continue to develop and publish what had firmly become established as their wheelhouse: asymmetrical multiplayer slasher horror games. On December 10th, 2021, Gun Interactive would unveil the trailer for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Similar to their creative approach with Friday the 13th, Gun Interactive approached the co-writer of the original 1974 film, a man named Kim Henkel, to gain the intellectual property rights. However, they were restricted to creating content based on the original film, forcing Gun Interactive to develop original characters akin to the roster of camp counselors in Friday the 13th. Gun Interactive would recruit British game developer Sumo Digital, a work-for-hire company and subsidiary of Sumo Group. By 2024, Sumo Digital would be replaced again by Black Tower Studios. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre would feature one team of 3 cannibalistic murderers against one team of 4 victims. The victims must escape the Sawyer clan before the family members track down and kill each of them. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre would be released on August 18th, 2023. Unlike its spiritual predecessor, the game would launch to immediate positive reviews. Much like its spiritual predecessor, the game is currently under scrutiny for its technical and matchmaking issues. Elphonic would also continue to develop asymmetrical multiplayer games based on intellectual property, broadening their scope to more movie genres of the 1980s. Their first release was Predator Hunting Grounds, based on the science fiction horror franchise of the same name. Predator Hunting Grounds would be published by Sony Interactive Entertainment and would feature content from a variety of films in the Predator franchise. It would be released as a PlayStation 4 and PC exclusive on April 24th, 2020, and would feature one team of 4 special operations personnel against one Predator. The operators must complete a series of tasks while battling and attempting to capture the Predator, while the Predator must hunt and kill the operators. Predator Hunting Grounds would release to mixed reviews, criticising its technical issues and general lack of content. Elphonic would later move on from developing games for other publishers, instead developing and publishing the first-person asymmetrical multiplayer game Ghostbusters: Spirits Unleashed, based on a science fiction comedy franchise of the same name. Taking place after the events of the 2021 film Ghostbusters Afterlife, Spirits Unleashed would feature one team of 4 Ghostbusters against one ghost. The ghost must attempt to escape the Ghostbusters while haunting a specific location. Spirits Unleashed would be released on October 18th, 2022. This too would receive mixed reviews, praising its style and aesthetics based on the film franchise, while criticising the lack of content. Illfonic's most recent asymmetrical multiplayer offering would release on June 4th, 2024, titled Killer Clowns from Outer Space, based on the 1988 science fiction horror comedy film of the same name. This game would be developed alongside Colombian game developer TerraVision Games. It would feature one team of 3 killer clown alien invaders against 7 humans. The clowns must attempt to bring forth the clownpocalypse by hunting and capturing humans in cotton candy cocoons and using the bodies to fuel generators, whilst the humans must find and unlock escape routes scattered across the map. Previously mentioned Randy Greenback is also attached to the project as executive producer. As for Friday the 13th, the franchise continues to struggle in releasing new content. At this time, no new installment in the series has emerged since the 2009 remake film, and a prequel streaming series has been under development by American independent production company A24 since 2022. As of this video, the writer, producer and showrunner of the series, a man named Brian Fuller, has been fired by A24 due to creative differences. What direction the show will take and when it will actually release remains uncertain. On May 16th, 2024, Horror Inc. would announce the launch of a new Friday the 13th media initiative titled Jason Universe, dedicated to launching new forms of entertainment, games, immersive experiences, and merchandise. Seemingly recovered from past animosity in the wake of the franchise's debut film screenplay court case, Victor Miller has been brought on board to work on Jason Universe Media alongside Horror Inc. Friday the 13th the game is a fascinating, unique and tragic tale in the video game industry, a title that would see 2 differing industries and fervent fandoms combine in anticipation for the release of a dream title that at the time had never been seen before and had been anticipated since its many failed projects of the 1980s. What had begun as a passionate tribute to slasher horror quickly spiralled into a small company tackling a behemoth of a franchise, and through circumstances beyond the creators' and crowdfunders' control, the game was doomed to die a slow, uneventful, and saddening death. In its wake, asymmetrical multiplayer has become a gameplay format adopted by many, and its developers have succeeded in springboarding themselves into new and engaging projects. On a personal note, I myself backed this project as a massive fan of the franchise since my childhood. I was one of those who longed for a Friday the 13th game, and my longing was achieved with its release.